deans, heads, faculty members, students, other UE community members, our distinguished panelists, and our guest, good evening. Regrettably, the principal, Professor Weber, could not be with us this evening and has sent his apologies. The 2021-22 budget has been dissected both inside and outside of Parliament. This evening, the Department of Economics and SALISES would like to welcome you to our 2021 Post-Budget Forum under the very opportune theme of turning challenges into opportunities. In the pre-pandemic era, Jamaicans faced a myriad of challenges. We are all aware that at present, the typical aggregate indicators of macroeconomic performance suggest that our country is now far worse off due to the pandemic. So essentially, in a modicum of time, the pandemic wiped out many of the gains that took us years and even decades to achieve. So yes, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed us to an inflection point. Nevertheless, we should all remember that some of the world's best innovations have emerged out of crises, and we have seen some of those innovations locally since the pandemic. Therefore, conditional on the current economic climate and the 2021-2022 budget, can we turn challenges into opportunities? The Department of Economics and SALISES have assembled an august body of specialists with knowledge of the 2021-22 budget to offer their perspectives on Jamaicans' prospects to transform challenges into opportunities. Let me briefly introduce our experts. First up, we have Mr. Julian Robinson, Opposition Spokesperson on Finance, MP. Next, we also have Mr. Michael Leckie, President of the Small Business Association of Jamaica. Then we have Dr. Christine Clarke, lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. And of course, last but not least, we have Dr. Kevin Williams, Research Fellow in SALISES, also at the Mona campus. Each panelist has 15 minutes to speak on this forum's theme. To ensure a seamless flow of our event, our Q&A will be at the end of the presentations. So I want to turn over now to our first presenter, Mr. Robinson. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadine, and let me thank the Department of Economics and SALISES for organizing this forum, which I believe is very timely. Let me acknowledge the other panelists who are here and the ones to come and those who are joining us online. Let me just start by placing in context the state of the economy, and I won't spend a long time on it because I think the numbers are well known. We expect to have a contraction year on year of somewhere close to 12% in GDP. We have lost about 130,000 jobs. Our debt to GDP has moved from 94% to 110%. Our tourism sector has been most affected and has contracted by somewhere in the region of 60 to 70%, which has had a major impact on the rest of the economy. The inequalities that existed in education, for example, have been exacerbated by the digital divide. And I'm sorry, just one second. I'm seeing some notes by people saying they can't hear. I'm not sure if people joining can hear us.
Can everyone just acknowledge if they can hear, please?
Okay, maybe it's sorted out. That is sorted out. So the inequalities around the digital divide in education have gotten worse because of COVID. And also COVID has affected what I would say more people who live on the margins. You know, a significant part of our economy are those who rely on the informal sector. Those persons have been most affected by COVID. So it has made, frankly, the poor poorer, quite frankly, and the businesses that have been barely surviving, many have gone out of business or are barely making ends meet. Now I want to talk about where I think the shift needs to take place in terms of challenges to opportunities. The first is that, as with other tourism-dependent economies, we have been significantly impacted by the fact that visitors can't come to our country. And I think it has exposed the dependence that we have as an economy on tourism. And there's nothing wrong with being a tourism-dependent economy. It's just that in a scenario like COVID, it exposes your vulnerabilities. So I think one of the first opportunities, and something that has to be pursued with real vigor, is how we look at diversifying the economy away from the dependence on tourism. And I believe there are areas of opportunity that exist. For example, in agribusiness and agro-processing, persons who supply our tourism industry, those suppliers should be looking to package and promote their goods, not just for the export to the tourism market, but to export to other markets. And to export to other markets means targeting first, maybe in the first instance, the diaspora, but to go beyond the diaspora and to get into the mainstream markets in primarily North America and other parts of the UK and probably in Europe. Secondly, in terms of, again, the manufacturers who would have depended a lot on the tourism industry, this is also an opportunity for them to look to other markets outside of Jamaica. And so I think the first challenge, which presents the opportunity for us as a country, is to genuinely now, having gone through this upheaval, put in place strategies and programs to support the diversification away from the dependence on tourism. That's the first thing. The second area that I believe presents an opportunity is, if you look at the industries that have been resilient throughout the crisis. So BPOs, business process outsourcing, has been one that has not just maintained its own, but has grown. And what COVID has demonstrated is that you can stay in Jamaica and you can provide services to clients anywhere in the world. You know, most of us have been restricted from travel. We normally go to conferences, we normally go to meetings, and we have had to make do with communication via Zoom. And we have, I can give examples of persons who for the last year have been doing their jobs via Zoom, people who have been involved in overseas missions and have been doing it via Zoom or other platforms. So what this has demonstrated is that there is a real opportunity in not just the traditional business process outsourcing industry, but really now is the time to see how you move up the value chain to other knowledge process outsourcing services. And it can be legal, an area where I believe we have a lot of opportunity because we produce so many lawyers out of the law schools that we have. It can be accounting, it can be architectural, it can be a number of those other disciplines where there are not enough companies locally to absorb the expertise and the talent, and the opportunity exists for the export of those services. I also believe at the micro level, there's an opportunity for Jamaicans to find jobs abroad. You know, I met a young lady who applied for and is now working with a company abroad. She's doing everything here from Jamaica. She's being paid in US dollars, and she's performing her service sitting right here in Jamaica. Now, more and more of those opportunities will emerge. Now, obviously, we are not going to be unique. Everybody else in the world is going to be looking for those opportunities, but I believe our proximity to the North American market, which makes us attractive in the BPO sector, and the relatively good, and I say relatively good, infrastructure at the telecoms level gives us a particular advantage. So I think that's a second area that I believe presents an opportunity for us during this pandemic to leverage in BPO, but to use the opportunity to move further up the value chain. And that does involve, obviously, some investment in education, because you're only going to attract the clients if they know that you have a pool of labor that can perform the tasks that they would want to see done. The third area, which again, the pandemic has forced, the work from home environment, where persons have been forced to work from home because you can't go into your office. And I think even post the pandemic, there is going to, I think every company has recognized that they don't need the same level of real estate space that they had to house all the people. And I think you're going to have hybrid models going forward. It might be, you know, you say to somebody, you come in 2 or 3 days a week, you spend the other 2 days at home. And that allows people some better work family balance. And I think the opportunity here is, well, the challenge it has posed, first of all, is it has again exposed the limitations of our own telecommunications infrastructure. With, you know, and I think all of us have had the issues of being dropped from Zoom calls, etc. But it is also an opportunity for not just existing telecoms, but for new entrants to come into the market to provide data services, which not just will allow us to do, whether it is Zoom meetings, but there's a very direct correlation between your expansion of broadband penetration and your economic growth prospects. So studies have been done which show that a 10% increase in broadband penetration can lead to a 1% increase in GDP growth. And the faster the broadband penetration, it gives you access to other types of value-added services that you can provide online. So that is another area that I believe for us as a country presents an opportunity. Again, one that the government with the PSOJ has entered on is the ENDS initiative, the e-commerce national delivery servicing, which I believe is a good platform. There may be issues in the pilot, but I believe it's a good thing because even post the pandemic, persons can use that as a way to augment their physical presence. And what I think that example has demonstrated, and other examples, like for example, JPS closing an office in Portmore, and I'm not going to speak about whether it's good or bad, but just to say companies have been forced to move online. And they are moving online because they recognize that they can deliver and interact with their customers without the physical presence. It means there is an opportunity for more online transactions, but also a challenge for those who are not naturally inclined to engage those online platforms, that we have to, as a country, help those people to come and move forward with the digital revolution. So one of the things that I recommended in my budget presentation is that there be a digital literacy program where we use our community centers, we engage not just the young who tend to be more adept at the technology, but in particular middle-aged and older persons to get online. Because if it means paying bills, if you try to physically go to a bank now, you probably will spend half an hour to an hour outside before you can get inside. So you are being forced more and more in whether it is with utilities, with other service providers to engage online. And there are obviously challenges there and there are risks with cybersecurity, et cetera, but it provides an opportunity. And the opportunity is for small merchants to develop an e-commerce presence and a platform which can be leveraged not just for Jamaica, obviously for things like food, it would be local to Jamaica, but they can use the e-commerce platform to deliver goods across the world. And this also is an opportunity for a small provider who prior to this may have only looked at his or her market as being local or even regional, to recognize that it is a global one. And we have seen with the delivery companies, particularly those who bring stuff into Jamaica, that there's been a huge surge in the volumes that they have transacted. And equally, for large companies like Amazon and others, they have also seen a significant uptake in activity. So there's also an opportunity for small scale providers to build out e-commerce platforms that provide them with the opportunity to reach much wider markets. Now, having said all of that, we can't forget the persons who are still on the margins, right? And while those opportunities, I believe, exist for persons who are adept, who can pivot, there are a lot who can't. And, you know, one of the themes of what I said in my budget presentation is while the government needs to support those who are pivoting, we still need just help for those who are on the margins. And on the margins, it means individuals who are in our informal sector and who have not had income for a year, as an example. It means small businesses that have, again, they're in the same problem and they just need basic support to try and see themselves through this crisis, see us through to a point where hopefully you'll have an increase in tourism and other areas that can rebuild the economy. Hopefully, if we get to herd immunity within the time frame, you can open up back the economy, you can move your restrictions, you can increase entertainment and nightlife, which is a significant part of our economy, and also our creative industries, which have taken a big blow because the creative industries connected to entertainment have suffered probably the largest fall off because of the measures that have had to be introduced. So in summary, and I'm conscious of the time, in summary, I would say we shouldn't allow the crisis to pass without having very specific measures about how we will take advantage of the opportunities. And there are some companies that have already made the adjustments internally to do so. There are companies that have produced record profits during this period, but there are many others that will need help, not just financial, but technical help, technical assistance, the incorporation of technology in their operations. And that also presents a risk, because the risk is there's going to be less dependence on routine manual labor, which is also something that has to be infused in our education system, which is that, you know, from a very early age, we have to build creative thinkers, problem solvers, and not just persons who go through our education system and swat and reproduce. So I think Jamaica will grow. We're going to have growth this year without a doubt, but the extent to which we will grow long-term is dependent on how we can reposition the economy, reduce our dependence on tourism, diversify and build out other industries, and create the kind of workforce that can be globally competitive, because we no longer have boundaries. COVID has taught us that we can stay where we are and we can interact and do business with almost anybody anywhere else in the world. So for me, I think it's an exciting opportunity, which has to be led, in my view, both by the private sector and the government, but the government also has to, while doing the pivot to take advantage of these opportunities, ensure that those who are on the margins are not forgotten and left behind, and that support is provided for them. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. So as I said before, we want a seamless transition. So we're going to go over now to Dr. Williams. The floor is yours. Remember guys, we'll take all questions at the end. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Williams, remember to unmute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me first put the budget into context. The COVID-19 pandemic imposed both a health and economic crisis on the Jamaican state. To address the economic crisis, the government of Jamaica has to first address the health crisis. There's no getting around, because consumers need to feel confident that they are protected against the risk of infections, and merchants will not expose their workers also to the risk of infection of this COVID. Therefore, COVID-19 has slowed the rate of market exchange in the Jamaican economy. In other words, the economic crisis facing Jamaica is induced by COVID, and COVID is not, what we are facing is not any normal recession. We're facing something like a natural disaster. So we need responses accordingly. Now, vaccination above a certain threshold in order to restore confidence so that consumers and merchants can again engage in personal transactions should be the government's top priority, in my view. At the same time, the government has an obligation to reduce the economic impact of this disaster-like shock on those, as Julian said, on those who are most vulnerable, that is, those on the margin of our economy. And I believe this is the context in which we should place the budget. So let's look, what has the government done on the vaccination front so far? The government has put aside, when I look at the numbers, I think about $60 billion for what it calls the SERVE program, including its vaccination program is embedded in that SERVE program. Of this $60 billion, the government will spend about somewhere in the neighborhood of $21 billion on its vaccination efforts. And whether this amount of expected expenditure on vaccination efforts is sufficient to get Jamaica on the other side of COVID, on the COVID pandemic, we are hopeful, but we shall all see. But according to the government, this expenditure will achieve herd immunity. And we are hopeful that we will achieve herd immunity, because that is important for us to move the economy forward. Once we get over the pandemic, then we can move the economic aspect of our country forward. It is worth noting that developing countries like Jamaica will always be behind in the queue, as access to sufficient quantities of COVID-19 vaccine will largely depend on how fast the rich club, that is OECD countries, vaccinate their own populations. We pray and hope that these rich countries, OECD countries, will vaccinate their populations in quick time, so that Jamaica can have access to vaccinate its own populations. So let's turn to the economic front. And Julian touches on some of these numbers. Jamaica is facing the worst economic contraction on record. Output is expected to contract by somewhere about 12% of GDP in the previous fiscal year. Government revenue underperformed somewhere in the neighborhood of $70 billion. Unemployment is somewhere around 11%. Debt to GDP ratio is now about 110%. Inflation is out of the targeted band, that is 4 to 6%. Inflation is somewhere about 6.3, 6.4%, thereabout. The main source of hard currency is has contracted by somewhere around 74%. In my mind, numbers like these call for urgent attention by our authorities, in particular the government. Under normal conditions, the private sector is expected to drive economic growth. Jamaica is not facing normal conditions. Jamaica is facing a health and economic emergency. Hence, the government will have to fill the slack left by the private sector in order to lay the groundwork for the private sector to rebound stronger in order to sustain robust economic growth. I believe that getting people back to work as quickly as possible is key, because unemployment, as we all know, as a way of wasting talents. That is, the longer you're unemployed, the more you're likely to become unemployable. And unemployment also generates misallocation by pushing people in all sort of negative directions. But the government, as far as the budget is concerned, proposed that through its infrastructure and beautification program, it will get people back to work. In terms of helping those on the margin, the government proposed that it's going to augment the PATH program so that people on the margin of our society can keep afloat. In my mind, a key gap, a key missing link in this social intervention is that those people who are unemployed, there is no consideration to provide opportunities to retool or retrain these people. Because if and when we get on the other side of COVID-19, the economy is going to be different. So many of those people who lost their jobs, they will have to, the private sector will require new talents. Okay, some of those occupations will no longer be available for those people who were unemployed, who were made unemployed as a result of COVID-19. Now, I want to, it's worth in my mind emphasizing, as Julian said, that the tourism sector, it's our main source of foreign currency. The tourism sector exposed the Jamaican economy, the extent to which we are undiversified, and we are susceptible to shocks, and it makes us extremely vulnerable. So going forward, I think the Jamaican, our government, our policymaker should pay keen attention to get to win the economy of tourism sector. I know it's not an overnight thing, but some attempt must be made to wean the economy away from the tourism sector, because the tourism sector exposed our vulnerability. One avenue I think our government can exploit is to continue to nurture and expand its relationship with our diaspora. Now, during the ongoing pandemic, remittances, when everything was, everyone was pulling back, when everything was standing still, remittances were flowing. In fact, based on some numbers that I've seen, remittances increased during the pandemic by somewhere about 23%. Now, that is an area I think the government should exploit. We need to nurture our diaspora, we need to engage them, and we need to exploit the opportunities that they offer. Even though many of them lost their jobs, many of them were surviving on low income, they still sent money back home to their relatives and friends in Jamaica. And that was a major source of foreign exchange during the pandemic for the Jamaican economy. So I believe that the government, and it's worth emphasizing, that the government should exploit, should nurture, and should build a strong relationship with our diaspora. Now, the micro, medium, and the small business sector, that sector accounts for a large share of employment in the country. And I think the government response, the government support to that sector, I think was timid. I believe that the government should provide more support to our micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, because they provide for a large share of our employment in the labor force. I also credit to the government, in my mind, to provide some independence for the central bank. I think that, in my view, that should be applauded, to sort of break the link between the relationship between the political directorate and our monetary institution. So I think that will bring an added sort of credibility. It will add some credibility to our economy going forward, and so the people of Jamaica will now be in a position to hold our monetary authority responsible. I think that is worth emphasizing. I also think the fiscal commission, even though it will not be in a position to dictate to the government, by speaking out, by providing an independent voice on the fiscal aspect of our economy, will also bring pressure to bear on how Jamaica will manage its fiscal responsibility. So those two policy innovation, I think, those are important going forward when we get over this pandemic. But it's worth emphasizing that we are facing a serious economic crisis induced by the pandemic, and it exposed the vulnerability of the Jamaican economy, in particular, how undiversified the Jamaican economy is. And this, in my mind, is something that the government and those who are responsible for managing our affairs will have to take a serious look at. So I'll stop there and await your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. We really appreciate your perspective. Up next, we'll have Dr. Christine Clarke. Dr. Clarke, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCloud, colleagues, and our viewers, participants. Thank you very much for coming to our public lecture. I just wondered, do I have the opportunity to share slides, or I'm not seeing the share screen? Is that possible?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing it. Yes. Thanks. Let me know if you are not seeing the show. I'm starting it from beginning. Are you able to view?
Yes, we can see.
Great. So I'm going to be doing perhaps a different dive into the GOJ budget and looking at the extent to which.
Dr. Clarke, quickly, I'm hearing some noise in your background. I'm not sure if your window is open or.
I can try to move just a bit. I'm not sure. It is, and the challenges that present themselves both in the public sector as well as for opportunities where the private sector and the international development partners who have made contributions during 2020 can contribute. So as usual, I'd like to just have a look at the context that this budget would have been framed in. what we were faced with basically in 2020 was record declines. Any other declines that we had heard about, had read about, anybody that tried to tell us about the declines that have been seen, whether in GDP, in jobs, in earnings, this year, 2020, would have eclipsed all of those in the past. In particular, we saw where, whilst it took us about 3 years in the wake of the global financial crisis to lose 100,000 jobs, we lost more than that in almost the first 3 or 4 months of the impact of the COVID-19, where the measures to control the spread of COVID-19 took effect. We heard about the tourism declines, but thankfully we had growth on the remittances side. Chances are due to maybe some amount of measurement error, but then also the fact that because the physical travel was curtailed, perhaps people started using more formal modalities to do their transfer than would have happened in the past. And of course, in the area of construction, we would have seen activity there that would have helped us through the period. So as expected, because we spoke 2 years ago at our last public lecture relating to the budget, the heavy emphasis was still on the maintenance of macroeconomic stability and, to the extent possible, continued reinforcement of this macroeconomic stability. And this, I guess, depending on maybe the school of thought that you subscribe to, can be criticized, maybe arguments for more government expenditure, given the comments, for example, made by Dr. Williams. The private sector is maybe impacted during this period, and therefore, you need an entity that can make interventions, such as the government, to do so. The COVID-19 response during 2020 tried to provide some amount of economic support for families and businesses. Of course, there was the need to finance the health response, secure emergency financing, as well as ensure that financial markets were liquid enough despite physical closures of financial institutions due to the restrictions. Pretty much there were 4 main things that needed to be balanced in the context of this new budget that has been presented. There are many different things that could be done. There, as one person has said, there's a laundry list of things that we would really love to do, we would really love to see done. But as indicated, then there's a need to prioritize within the priorities. And I know that there's far more room for discussion there if we have a look. And going forward, and you'll see this as I progress and talk about some of the challenges in terms of the outlook or the opportunities, is the issue of risk. Yes, we now are presented with multiple vaccines. And yes, we are seeing where in the United States, for example, they're up to an average of 3 million vaccines being delivered per day. Our problem, however, might be our own uptake among the population that is more active. There's still a lot of anti-vax sentiments. There are still quite a few people not trusting the speed with which the vaccine was developed. Some persons don't even believe that there's a need for the vaccine. And then there's a thrust to, in the context of the response, initiate or advance the modernization of the economy as far as is possible. And in this regard, you would have seen the announcements of the central bank digital currency as one of the kind of major planks of this modernization thrust. The kind of be all and end all of this is to respond to the context, the fallout in growth, the fallout in jobs as far as possible, in terms of the response for 2021-22. So I presented you the key elements. The modernization is clearly seen, the thrust for the digital society, and I think the small business efforts of the government with respect to this Go Digital platform previously announced in the COVID-19 recovery plan is one. Importantly, whilst we currently are out of the hurricane season, we know that that is certainly going to be coming up shortly. And so the continued building of fiscal buffers has remained an area of emphasis. Macro stability, we will always see that as a prerequisite, one of the prerequisites and a plank for competitiveness and growth. Tax reforms will continue through administrative efforts, and there are going to be significant strides as it relates to public sector transformation, primarily in the area of the implementation of shared services. And we see the efforts in relation to the student loan reform, primarily driving at the need to ensure that the tertiary enrollment and scaling up can happen through our students' continued individual effort. There is some provision for support for public bodies who depend heavily on, visitors or fee for service that would have been thwarted during the pandemic. And of course, last but not least, the thrust to expand social protection. In terms of, so these are the main elements, but if we wanted to kind of get a snapshot at where the emphasis are, apart from what we'll talk about in the SERVE program, the largest allocation in terms of recurrent expenditure has been towards education, as you can imagine. And we've had significant increases in terms of the allocation to PATH and the social pensions, looking at persons outside of the formal contributory system. And importantly, on the capital expenditure, we have seen increases of 20% that will be targeted towards the recovery effort. The snapshot on SERVE provides you with the kind of overarching expenditure that will be, you could say, is directly targeted towards the economic growth as well as the recovery of jobs, at least in the very short term. The Ministry of Health getting quite a bit out of it for the vaccination programs and other allied and supporting activities. Construction, of course, being seen here as, or the indication is that it is being seen as the major driver that is going to generate the economic growth, the activities, as well as support just general ease of movement and utility of various corridors in the production process as far as possible. Supporting the digitalization thrust, of course, the need to expand Wi-Fi and broadband, direct business support, as well as continued support for vulnerable persons. The question of whether or not this is sufficient is yet to be seen, because as I pointed out, there are many downside risks, and these downside risks weigh significantly in the Jamaican context because of, the fact that we're a SID, the fact that we're a small open economy, and therefore our ability to sway whatever is happening internationally is not going to be as profound as we maybe want it to be, despite our attempts at, for example, the UN and other international and regional fora. As I indicated, some of those downside risks are the domestic vaccination uptake. We are largely seeing older persons who are, yes, most vulnerable as far as the proportion of severely ill, as well as our unfortunate fatalities from COVID-19. But again, we are not seeing necessarily an interest. Yes, the program is not open to younger persons now, but we're not seeing that kind of interest necessarily from the younger segments of the population who are of working age. The dependence on the global environment is still going to continue. Of course, we're looking for that rebound in tourism. So clearly what happens in the global environment and people's perception of their need to travel internationally, and all of those kind of preferences and tastes, functions that drive interest in tourist activities will impact our ability to rebound there. Regionally, I have not been able to pick up a lot of traction in terms of information widely circulating about regional cooperation to support the recovery. I've put it here as a downside risk, but as I'm indicating, I'd love to hear more about kind of regional efforts in the Caribbean to see the extent to which there could be regional solutions to support or all islands in the region. Importantly, the SERVE program, as indicated, you will notice there is 31 billion here for construction activities. I mean, this assumes a significantly improved, well-oiled machine to implement these multiple capital projects concurrently. Not that it can't be done, because we do acknowledge the unemployment is quite high. But is it the skills that you need to actually implement these kinds of projects? That is what will come down to the test. And so, of course, if there are significant lags in implementation, then clearly that multiplier impact that we expect from these capital projects will, of course, not necessarily materialize. And then our capacity to identify and engage the most vulnerable, and maybe we could expand it to all the persons estimated to be categorized as being poor. We know the path is there and it's being expanded, and MPs are doing their bit with their funds that are available. But what is our actual capacity to identify and engage them in a sustained way, in a empowering way that will enable them to find the means, the footing to pursue their own livelihoods? Our growth expectations, albeit from a low base, are quite aggressive given where we are. And so that is going to be another driving force. Job growth, that is where the focus is. Again, going to be impacted by this capacity to implement. Well, we've, on the upside, have some positives. Some have been highlighted before. We're 2/3 the way through our series of weekend lockdowns, and we see what is coming out, as I've indicated, the US, the UK vaccination, the UK indicating overnight that they are likely to reduce their lockdown measures over the next couple of weeks based on the numbers that are emanating from both vaccination, new cases, hospitalization, and fatalities from COVID-19. The prioritization of the recovery, as indicated before, is a positive sign and upside risk here. And then the capital projects from the budget seem to be aligned with Vision 2030 and the SDGs, which we know we cannot lose sight of. So the sufficiency is going to depend on the extent to which these and the other upside risks can outweigh the downside risks that we face. So overall, I would categorize the outlook as being conservative generally, though there are some, kind of high areas indicated, a focus somewhat on modernization and clearly on recovery and the challenges here. In particular, the need for inclusive growth and the potential support that's being placed to families. 2 years ago, this slide was up as, kind of the to-do list. We see that there is still infrastructure work to be done. The BOJ modernization well underway, but we need that tick off as the, the implementation date to begin that operation. And of course, our public sector reform and transformation efforts remain inclusive of our education sector, which is currently under review. So as we look towards the horizon, I just like us to recognize that there are many players that we have to call upon and depend on. Of course, the private sector efforts, not just in their driving investments, but also indicating where solutions such as indicated before the ENDS project can provide a mechanism through which commerce, economic activity, and the spin-offs from those to continue to play out. Of course, our international development partners, they played a significant role, especially in the initial COVID response, from the development of platforms to coordinate all the pledges that came in to the actual dispatch and matching of available items to needs. And this will continue to be important. Knowledge capital and their various technical services are critical. The social economy, as you see, the vulnerable families, persons in communities will continue to play an important role. And so in essence, the government's challenge is going to be to see how it can, at least not stand in the way of these entities performing their roles. And in terms of focus, digitalization is going to be the major thrust, not just in our broadband, but how do you get people to securely be online, to work online, do business online, hopefully not live online, but the other things that will keep life going. We certainly need to scale up, if not leapfrog, our educational quality. And this is not just thinking about within the classroom. This is broadening the entire population's view of education. What is really needed? Is it about the teacher only? What are some of the complementary inputs to education that we are not implementing or not utilizing? How do we leverage whatever resources we have to do that? And last but not least, we have to focus on our recovery in the context of our long-term goal, Vision 2030 and the SDGs. 2021 was supposed to start the decade of action as far as the UN's SDGs go. And I'm sure within the context of government Vision 2030, the accomplishment of those goals. And so within those two long-term kind of plans, we have to ensure that our actions align with that ultimate goal as exposed by government about 11 years ago. Thank you. I'll stop here and turn back over to Dr. McCloud.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clarke, for your perspectives. I just want to remind our audience that we have our QA functionality that's up and running. So if you have any questions, you can type in the questions and then we'll definitely ask our panelists to answer these questions at the end of all the presentations, right? So up next, we have Mr. Michael Leckie, President of the Small Business Association. Mr. Leckie, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours. Some of these questions, and when I can get him on, then we'll go ahead and turn the floor over to him for his presentation. Okay, so we have a question here for Dr. Clarke. Okay, so do we have Mr. Leckie? No? Okay, so Dr. Clarke, there's a question for you in the Q&A. It says, what are your views on the fiscal year 2021-22 real GDP growth projection of 5.2%? And she made reference to table 2E FPP and said, where do you see the greatest opportunity for growth in fiscal year 2021-22? And also in which quarter do you see growth occurring?
Okay, thanks for that question. As I indicated, I think the growth target is aggressive, and to the extent that it is hinged on a rebound in tourism, again, depending on our vaccination rollout, which is going to be impacted by, again, the feelings. I'm sure the tourism workers will, but if we are interested in non-enclave tourism, where we expect tourists to go out, the low take-up of the vaccine in the general population can be a deterrent to visitors who are coming maybe from a more highly vaccinated locations. So that could be a factor. And as I said, also, the extent to which we can actually, in reality, implement so many construction projects simultaneously and quickly is also going to be the other determining factor. I don't know that it has ever been done, and that even if it has, we still have that kind of capacity to implement so many capital projects, which I think is another plank of the growth simultaneously without, a substantive effort. Some people might call for a czar or somebody to bring all of this together, scheduling and the whole gamut of it. So I think here, that is one of the main areas for growth. in terms of 2021, 22, anything else, chances are is not going to get off the ground until the last quarter, you know, of the fiscal year. So that would be January to March 22. Because as I'm saying, unless it's something that, you know, it's kind of cookie cutter, you just lift it and place it in Jamaica or wherever, it's going to be difficult to get something off the ground to have an impact before. We see small, and it has to be small, pilot projects like the ends, like, you know, we've heard about, you know, the Amazons, etc. But on the large scale, in terms of you're thinking about the macro level growth, that is going to, that's going to be challenging if it's not already in the pipeline. So I think it is a bit aggressive, but because we've never seen a number like this, acknowledging though that we are going to be growing from a low base, and that is the 2020 outturn. So, you know, kind of like if the winds are in our favor, we may just get very close to that, and that could provide a kind of short to medium term impetus for other investments going forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Clarke. Let me see if I can get Mr. Leckie on. If not, then we'll start, you know, we'll go with the other questions. Mr. Leckie, are you on? Can you hear me? So we have a question for Mr. Robinson. Anonymous attendee, you want to put your name, please? That's nice. Great ideas, sir. Re-innovation and acquiring skills to take advantage of new opportunities. How possible it is to have a cost-effective, more nuanced public education campaign on a community level so that we can coexist with the virus without causing significant spikes?
All right, what I would say, in each of the communities, we have what we call these community access points, which were developed starting back in about 2014 when we were last in office. Many of them have fallen into disarray because the organizations haven't been able to maintain it. But I believe it's a quick win in terms of reestablishing a digital presence within communities. It would allow students who are currently at home to access online education while they're at home by going to a physical community center where you have free internet access and broadband. But it would also allow you to implement what I would call the digital literacy training program. So you ensure that those who most need it, and the ones who most need it are those who are on the margin, that they are exposed to that. And I don't think it is something that would be very expensive to do. Some of these modules can be done online. And if you have the computers and the internet access, people can go and take advantage of these training programs. So at the community level, I believe using these community centers, which are equipped with computers and Wi-Fi access, is a way to go. And it would, in my view, kill a number of birds with one stone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. Okay, we still have more questions, but again, let me try to see if I can get Mr. Leckie on. I would love to hear his perspective. Mr. Leckie, can you hear me now?
I think he's still muted.
Still muted.
It seems as if he's having some internet issues, so we're trying to rectify. So just go ahead with it.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. Just let me know when he's when I should you know, go over to him. Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, so the questions are coming in, or I guess our audience are really engaged and excited. So Natalie said, and she didn't say who she wanted to answer this question, so we're just gonna put it out there for all the panelists. She said, thanks for the presentations. There has been emphasis on lack of diversification of tourism-dependent economies. However, some countries have been able to pivot in this sector, and we have newly implemented models based on offering of remote work in digital nomads visas. Is this a viable option for Jamaica?
I would say yes. I think I can tell you there are persons who are currently in Jamaica, who have been in Jamaica working for an extended period of time, who have jobs in the US and are working remotely here, just doing it informally. I do believe it's an opportunity which won't last for very long because the US market will probably recover given their pace of vaccination, but I think it's something we can do. Barbados has done it with a model where I think people pay might be 3,000 or 5,000 Bajan and they can work in the country for a period of time. I think it's something that we should do, should have done already. And I still think you may have a 6-month window to do it. You know, when these people come here, they are spending, they're renting facilities, they're buying food, they're contributing to the economy. And for many of them, it's no different from working in New York City or DC or their home countries. They're connected by internet and they're doing the same jobs. So yes, I believe that's an option, but limited because we don't have a lot of time to do it.
Okay, great. Anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, let me jump in here.
Sure.
You know, we talk about and myself included, that our economy is undiversified. The truth is, Singapore is undiversified. Singapore is a financial hub for in East Asia. Jamaica is the tourism hub in the Caribbean. Now, Jamaica is a small state. You know, what are we going to diversify in? Are we going to, what else can we do? You know, which sector should we think about diversifying in? The tourism sector, we have a comparative advantage in the tourism sector. It is true that when we face shock, you know, we are going to suffer disproportionately. But what else can we diversify into? What else can we do?
I could also comment. I think,
Go ahead, Chris.
yes, not, you know, I think we certainly can try the route of these different types of visas. I think though that the kind of punchline here is not necessarily on just taking what we see others doing, but the idea that we really have to reimagine how we have been operating. We have to stop thinking that this is the system, and as they would say in the streets, so it's set, this is how we operate, and we're just waiting. As you know, maybe last year we were thinking we're just waiting for COVID-19 to end so we can go back to whether it's sun, sand, and sea, or face-to-face classes, or working from an office as prescribed by your employer. And so I think the message here, and even the digitalization thrust, is that you have to reimagine what it is you're doing, how you can offer it, what other value can you add, how can we scale the value chain, or where possible leapfrog, so we're not, you know, going incrementally anymore. We're saying we're working, you know, whether it's blue sky or open sky, whatever it is, this is how we're going to now proceed, whether or not we can quote unquote return to pre-COVID times in our particular sector. And we all are facing that in every single aspect of our life. So I think that is the thrust that even government has to think about. You think about the CARE program that was implemented last year, and we're trying to do it efficiently, the best social distancing, and yet we still end up with long lines at the stadium for persons to collect, with what many of us on this forum would think it's not worth going to the stadium to collect, but you saw many people in lines for many hours in the sun to collect the $10,000 compassionate grant. And that just opens up and shows us bare that the way that we've been doing things, whether it is through the financial sector, the education sector, it really was never efficient. It served our purpose because we wanted to have a paper stamp to say, yes, you signed this paper with a blue pen. But at the end of the day, we were not really delivering service at a high standard. We were not necessarily delivering whatever it is we were doing at the standard that we clearly need to be now in the context of these restrictions. They're just opening up to us the fractures in our system. And so we need to just either get rid of it or figure out how we're going to transform it to now meet what consumers want. A lot of our social distancing measures, yes, they're working, but if you think about when the positivity rate rises, is there really room for a bubble without a digital economy or e-commerce where you can buy the things you need without having to go out and touch anything in any store and come back into your car? So it's about reimagining. Do we need these big plants and these big supermarkets and all of these things? Yes, we have to be careful about how quickly and how fundamentally we change, because again, as I indicated, this is a very high risk environment that we're in. So we do not necessarily, I'm not saying we should go and hit down buildings because we don't need them anymore, but the way how we operate is what we have to think about. And one of the challenges is also going to be, we have, if we recall, maybe in 2017 or thereabout, there was some report that 70% of our labor force is uncertified, or was then. I don't know what the current number is. So the issue about recovery now for us is not just about even getting that growth of 5%. We could get growth of 15%. What will that economy look like? And to what extent will any of those 130,000 and maybe counting persons be able to participate in that new economic structure? That is probably where a lot of the policymakers' mental space is taken up, because you can't really force the private sector to hire persons just because you want employment rates to rise. And in the context of having completed 2 consecutive IMF agreements and trying to entrench fiscal discipline, the solution is not for the government to go and hire them as permanent workers. So how will you treat with this new layer maybe of vulnerable persons, of maybe persons who become part of the working poor? Where will they be? How can we, and to what extent can we empower them to reimagine how they worked, what skills they can acquire? And this has implications, right through the economy, tertiary education, how it's structured, TVET, everything is going to basically, at this point, be up for debate, up for justification. What's the value, what's the utility of the way that we're operating, and how will it contribute to, that kind of scaled up value chain type of operations? That's what we need at this point to move forward sustainably, thinking about our development goals simultaneously, not just growth, but also development.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Clarke. I have a question here. So I'm getting questions in the chat and also in the Q&A. Guys, it would be nice if you just put it in the Q&A. It's quite easier for me to see, but nevertheless, I'm improvising because questions are coming in, as one of my colleagues would say, fast and furious. Okay, so Mr. Robinson, there's a question from Paul Ward. Since agriculture can help many of those who can't pivot, that is those on the margin, what concrete measures would you suggest?
I'd recommended a
or,
couple. Sorry.
Are you seeing the chat? No, the question isn't finished. Well, there are multiple questions within a question. Or I think it does rather need a remake. Something like AMC needs reinventing. And then he's saying, given the surpluses and the shortages of foodstuff in different parts of the island, small farmers need better access to land, maybe a new land lease. And all this can feed into manufacturing as agro-processing.
Yeah, so the one very specific recommendation I made in the budget presentation is to look at the issue of irrigation, which is a huge problem for farmers across the country, and in particular for small farmers, many of whom obviously can't afford irrigation systems and who depend on natural rainfall to produce their crops, which means that they can't produce crops year round year because they depend on the seasons. So I believe small scale irrigation can have an impact, which would facilitate people producing year round, and they'll have an opportunity to produce and sell all year round. Some of the markets which I believe were lost to tourism can be regained through farmers market type initiatives. I think the farmers markets that have been done have been successful in linking farmers to consumers directly. It has to be more institutionalized. And also I think there is a greater opportunity to, it may seem an old-fashioned term, but to substitute a lot of the imports which drive our tourism industry, particularly in food, with local produce. And that will also enhance food security. So specifically, I think irrigation is one, and how RADA interfaces in terms of helping the farmers manage their crops so that you don't have overproduction and underproduction is also another part that can be implemented.
Okay, thank you so much. I have a question and I think a comment from Peter John Gordon. He said a comment was made that we are too dependent on tourism. By the way, this is for all the panelists, so anyone can take it up. What really is tourism? In the national accounts, it is recorded in a sub-account. That is, tourism is no different from other activities, but called tourism when a tourist makes the purchase. A taxi is, hold on a second, I lose this one. Dr. Gordon, can you write me a shorter question next time? Okay, hold on a second, let me find it back. This is the issue with the chat, you can't really scroll as, right. Okay, so let me go again. A comment was made, so sorry about that. A comment was made that we're too dependent on tourism. What really is tourism? In the national accounts, it is recorded in a sub-account. That is, tourism is no different from other activities, but called tourism when a tourist makes the purchase. A taxi is part of tourism when a tourist takes it and part of the local economy when a local takes it. Tourism is merely a form through which exports take place, agricultural products, entertainment, furniture, sheets and towels, etc. Tourism, he believes, is very stable with 911, 9/11, and the current pandemic, the only times we see serious downturn in tourism. So I guess his comment is that he doesn't feel that we're too dependent on tourism. Would anyone like to comment?
I mean, I think if you look at the impact, I don't know if Peter John is saying, making a statement that we are not as dependent as we should be on tourism, not sure. But the reality is when you look at the numbers and the impact that the COVID has had on the economy, without a doubt, tourism has had the greatest negative impact and has contributed certainly to the vast number of the unemployed, and certainly in terms of the overall output, it has been negatively impacted. I mean, there's a broader debate about the impact that tourism has and whether the country retains enough from the tourism product as we should. And that's I think a different debate, but the linkages certainly to, I think where an opportunity exists now is with the linkages to agriculture and to manufacturing. And as I said earlier, to leverage like food processors to look beyond the tourism market, to look at other export markets, including diaspora and beyond, for manufacturers to look beyond, again, or local and regional markets. And those are players who are already in the business. So the pivot is not as huge as someone who is starting from scratch. But, you know, without a doubt, you know, COVID has shown us that we are a very high tourism dependent economy. And the impact has been severe with the fall off.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. Let me try again one last time to get Mr. Leckie. Oh, great. Thank you. Mr. Leckie is here. Mr. Leckie, yours. Let me just reintroduce him again for you guys. He's the president of the Small Business Association. Take it away. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Evening to your panelists and evening all. But I apologize, first of all, because there's a connectivity problem that I'm having. And I may go off and I may come on back, but let us leave that and just jump straight into things. First of all, the small businesses as a whole have been it has been a challenge for us since it's been a year now since we're in the pandemic. And everything that happens, small and minute as it is, it affects small businesses because everyone knows that small businesses, our profit margin is very small, and we are dependent on a number of things. We cannot afford to see a movement in the dollar. We cannot see a movement on prices because it affects everyone. And I must say that there are a number of things that we in the sector, MSME sector, see as movement, and it can be added to the economy, and it can allow the economy to grow. First of all, we see consumption as the driver for the growth of the economy. Why we are saying that? Because when we look at when we consume goods and services, we see a positive effect on the economy, and this will cause the economy to grow with a multiplier effect. The added jobs, it moves from the supply side to the demand side, and everyone benefits. The small businesses, the sector has called upon for a number of things, especially for what we're looking for is a stimulus package for us to actually survive. I must add that anecdotally, when I looked inwardly from my membership, we have suffered. We have suffered in terms of closures. We have seen 30% of businesses being closed. As a result, we noticed that an immediate contraction of 11% of the last quarter of the economy, and it affects the small businesses as such. What we're looking at, first of all, we see as part of the solution for the government. As a nation, we need to look at winners, choose some winners that we think we can push and we can invest in, and we can allow others come from outside and invest in the economy. We look at agriculture for small agriculture producers, and we look at small businesses. Where small business is concerned, you know, I'm going to be passionate about it, because small businesses is mostly is retail and wholesale driven. And when you have an injection in the economy via a stimulus package or a government intervention, what you'll have an immediate turnaround of the profit margin of the small businesses. For agriculture, especially small agricultural producers, where we see winners here, because I represent small farmers also, that we're looking at what we have homegrown. We're looking at coffee and we are looking at cocoa. Those two products, when you look at it, if we can do value added is the mainstream where we can have our growth in both foreign exchange and the growth in the economy. What we're doing in both cocoa and coffee, what we're doing is putting together, we put together it and we export the beans, which is not good enough. We can't just looking at just taking our raw material and sending it. I must add, let me just give you a little snapshot. Take, for instance, our cocoa. Our cocoa is as a designation of fine flavor. Fine flavor means it's only 13 countries in the world which actually produce fine flavor cocoa. We're not looking at bulk. For instance, we're not looking at Kit Kat and Snickers. We are looking at high-end now. When we send away to Europe from our only single buyer, what they have converted it into chocolate bar and other means. And what they are got is more than 500%. And what happened, our local farmers are the ones who are suffering because the farm gate price is very low, and we have people not being interested at all. But the people in Europe are the ones profiting from it. As I said, we need to choose winners in agriculture and small business. If we can push there and we can have it moving. We know that we have to go digital. We know that we have to pivot. We know the buzzwords. We know what is happening. But look at what we have presently. What we have presently, we need to push consumption. We need to have these two winners and allow the economy to grow. And the factors of production, as we know, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. What we need to do is have the efficient use of all of these factors and allow them to be used properly. And we need to look at the infrastructure of the economy and look at the base, do the necessary investment in it, and then we will see the growth. And we can reset the economy. As we know, tourism has gone 75% in its contraction and is no longer a foreign exchange earner. We need to pay our bills, especially our external debt. And we have to be proficient in the world economy so that we are able to pay our debt. So we have to look, and we must look. And then if we don't do that, these two winners, along with efficient use of the factors of production and the consumption driver, these are the ones the small business sector is crying out for. And this is what we think is the need for the movement of the Jamaican economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leckie. Thanks so much. I'm glad you were able to make a seamless presentation despite the challenges you were having earlier. Very interesting perspective. Now we'll go back to the Q&A because we had started taking questions in your absence just to keep things flowing. So now we're going to go back to the Q&A, trying to tie questions together. I know that there are questions in the chat. I'm now manning both. Sophia essentially said, and this is, I think, for all the panelists, to piggyback on Paul Ward's question that was asked earlier, do the panelists think that the amount of expenditure, which is slightly below the 2020-21 budget in real terms, can be growth enhancing? In other words, how can less expenditure give more growth, notwithstanding capital expenditure?
Well, I would say I don't think it is going to be sufficient. I think there's going to be more. While there is a heavy reliance on the infrastructure projects, I do share the concern about our capacity to implement, but also if you look at the half of the, well, 17 of the 31 billion is the South Coast project. The majority of that, you will get some employment, which is going to be very geographic based on where the actual expansion is, but the real value is not going to, in my view, percolate within the local economy. You know, you will have some of the persons providing aggregate, but the cement, the steel, you know, the big suppliers, and these are projects which a lot of the profit is going to go back to the Chinese contractor. So I'm not as sanguine about the construction impact of the infrastructure projects, the road projects. Long term, obviously, I believe it will open up parts of the country which right now are not as accessible because of lack of good roads. But I'm not as sanguine that in the short term, it will provide the boost that we think it will. So I do believe there's more that the government has to do if we're going to get the growth targets that we want.
Okay, thank you so much. Does anyone else
Yes.
have a comment?
Dr. McCloud, what I would say also, I mean, you know, the extent to which on the growth side, the expenditure could be enhancing even though lower, is really going to be tied to, as I indicated before, the government's ability to kind of, in other words, almost line item by line item, associate the jobs that are going to be required there with the persons who need jobs. And that is not, I mean, as easy as it sounds, not as trivial as it is. So that's one thing. And then two, on the vulnerable group side, women who are now working from home and all of those dimensions, unemployed youth, making the match there within the time that we want to implement this, so we have growth in the year, is not also necessarily going to happen, because again, we're talking about infrastructure. So this has to be done with a certain level of understanding and expertise and coordination and all kinds of other management skills, if it is that we're supposed to see the benefit within the short time frame that we're in. And so again, it's going to come down to the government or the contractor's ability, I don't know if that is there, to be able to do that. Can you spend less and earn and get more growth? Again, as I'm saying, it depends on how specifically you're doing it, as indicated. If the contractors and the big kind of companies will, what will they use those funds to do? Is it simply going to go into profit sharing? Are there other things that they will do, spin-offs from it? Or is this a repatriation story largely? So that is what I would say. I mean, it on the face of it, and I think it also goes back to the fact, as I indicated, that this really is a very conservative budget. As indicated, is less than last year, because again, of the risks that are out there and just the uncertainty about which risks will be weighted more against us, which one of the positive or the upside risks will be more in our favor, and what size will that be? And so the idea that chances are we're going to have to spend more. I mean, we can have supplementary budgets. This is not it for the entire fiscal year, as needs be. And so I'm sure that at finance or, the other relevant entities, they'll be watching to see again this rollout, the uptake in the vaccination, how or different markets of various kinds respond as our control, infection and prevention and control measures are relaxed. What happens to our numbers or hospitalization rates? It's there are lots of variables that will impact the extent to which we'll kind of open the spigot a little more and spend some more. In what areas will we spend and how will we do it? Again, to be refined depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. So I actually think that maybe this is a strategic move to not go too hard, and then you find yourself in a situation where markets start to kind of shake because of how you've approached your expenditure. We've got an indication that we've spoken to the ratings agencies. The debt to GDP numbers that we're seeing are really as a result of the denominator, which is GDP. Not that we're borrowing more, but I'm sure that if we are in a situation where debt needs to be one of those things that we rely on a little more, depending on the situation we find ourselves in, how justifiable it is, that would be one of the things that would be countenanced to some degree. So I think, in my opinion, that it is strategic, this kind of lower budget, so that if we do need to come back, we can, and we'd have enough wiggle room. Again, noting, as I indicated, we're looking another hurricane, Atlantic hurricane season in the eye. We don't know necessarily what that will bring. Yes, we have the buffers, but what the damage will be, if any, and if we experience any other climate or natural disaster related events, how will we be able to cope in the context of everything that we're indicating?
Can I make a short comment?
Sure, go ahead, Dr. Williamson.
It's in normal times, our economic growth is anemic. It's not unreasonable to say the infrastructure program is not going to give us a kick that we need at this time. It's not going to plug the aggregate demand that is lost as a result of the number of people who lost their jobs. So I don't see that happening. Okay, we need for economic growth to take place, for it to have economic growth, all sectors have to come on board. Okay, so the construction sector is not, I mean, most of the jobs that are going to be created will be temporary. These are not long-term jobs. Okay, so I don't see that happening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Okay, so again, guys, listen, I'm so excited this evening, but because I must say that you guys are very engaged, the questions are coming in. So I'm juggling the chat, as I said before, and the Q&A. So let me go back over now to the chat. In terms of, this is a question from Paul. In terms of a new start, should we not restore the NHT fully to its intended role? That is, stop taking 11.4 billion each year for the general budget and use all the contributions to assist those on lower incomes, perhaps on the Pride model of a service lot and a one-room starter home. I hope something like this is part of the intended construction plans for the current year. Anyone can take this, any panelists can take this.
Well, I would say even with the current budget, NHT is spending $57 billion this year, which is the single largest capital investment of, it's almost as large as the entire SURF program, actually. The issue that we have in housing is not, we don't have a general housing problem because there's enough private sector at the middle to the high level. The issue is a supply side issue at the lower level, lower income level at what I would call between $7 to $10 million for a starter lot. The government has to do more, and I spoke about this in my budget presentation, to incentivize developers to participate in this segment of the market. Right now, they don't have an incentive because you can build townhouses for $30 and $40 million and they're sold. And there is enough capital in Jamaica right now chasing real estate to, you know, if you, in my own constituency, on a daily basis, single family dwelling houses knocked down and townhouses and apartments are being built. So to get to the lower end of the market, the government has to do some things. You have to look at land and proximity of land to urban centers and land that is owned by government. You have to look at the approval processes to make it easier for people to get approval versus 18 to 24 months. You have to look at providing some funding and subsidy for some of these developers. But I don't believe any of these are insurmountable, and I believe they can be done because we have a real issue with too many Jamaicans who contribute to NHT and get absolutely no benefit from it. So even if you, to answer Paul's question, even if you continue to pull the 11 billion, with the current level that you have, you can do more for low income housing, which isn't being done. And I'm not making a political statement because it has been an issue which has affected both political administrations over a period of time, but I believe we need to do something about it now and address it quickly, and we can on the supply side.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. So there's a comment from Peter John Gordon about vaccine, and there's also a question about vaccine. So I'm actually going to read the comment first, and then I read the question, and you guys can answer. So the comment that Peter John has made about the vaccine is the following. The question of regional response was raised. CARICOM could act as a negotiating tool for the individual countries in terms of accessing vaccines. The US has a stockpile of AstraZeneca, which is not yet approved. It has enough of the other vaccines to cover its entire population. The US has made available some AstraZeneca vaccines to Canada and Mexico. The CARICOM countries should try to secure some of these. So that is a comment. So let me go and read the question. No, that is from Sophia. And this question is for Dr. Clarke. So you guys can answer the question as well as comment on the comment. Dr. Clarke mentioned regional solutions are currently missing. We all know vaccine diplomacy and vaccine imperialism is a problem. We are price takers, as usual, in the global market. What would happen if Cuba's Soberano is approved by the WHO, should CARICOM gravitate to this vaccine to achieve herd immunity and behave like a region for our economic good?
Right, I had made some responses to Dr. Gordon's comment, but he didn't raise Cuba. So in terms of the Cuban vaccine, from my understanding, the issue is this WHO approval. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think as far as the vaccine is concerned, or vaccination thrusts are concerned, each country has been going on their own and, kind of trying to wade through all the technical information and whatever else there is. I mean, albeit with support from PAHO. And so I don't know, I'm not sure how CARICOM sees itself at this point, where it sees it should play a role, if at all any. I have not been hearing anything on a CARICOM level. Each country simply seems to be kind of trying to negotiate. So I'm really just putting it out there, because certainly this vaccination is one area. I mean, the digitalization thrust, can we finally be one region, or, an integrated region in the way that we thought? Many countries now coming up with the CBDC. Can we actually use this, as we're indicating, as an opportunity to implement some of these regional public goods, some of these things that generate very positive externalities right across the region and benefit everybody? That is really the question I'm throwing out there. I'm sure if Cuba's vaccine receives the approval of the WHO, I think countries will be more interested, and maybe that is what will drive that regional thrust. I'm not sure how that would necessarily change the current stance, the current modus operandi of CARICOM. But as I indicated in the chat, there are other CARICOM bodies that could play a role. I mean, there's one, as I said, about region digitalization. There's, the transportation issues. So there are different things, the educational institutions that have not really been, from my perspective, demonstrating any thought leadership, any diplomacy on any particular area to support member states as far as this is concerned. So the response to COVID, recovery from COVID is concerned. So that would be my take on it. I'm not sure, even if the Cuban vaccine is approved, that will now provide the impetus.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clarke. Anyone else would like to add?
I mean, I'd reiterate what Christine said. I think COVID has exposed, or I'm not even sure whether CARICOM as a project is viable. There was a recent article by Camila Gonzalez out of St. Vincent questioning it, and looking at how countries like Jamaica have absolutely deviated from common positions in CARICOM in a number of different scenarios. And each country has pretty much gone out on its own and tried to acquire the vaccines on its own. Obviously, I think we should have explored greater cooperation from Cuba, even before whether their vaccine is approved by WHO. They've been world leaders in providing remedies and vaccines across the world, and for some reason, we really haven't collaborated much with them. But I'm not really optimistic of any regional initiative that will help us at this point. I think every man and woman is on their own, trying to do something for themselves so that they can survive.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. So we have a question here in the chat from Paul again. And he said, regarding tourism, what are the actual net gains given that only 30% of the spending stays in Jamaica and that multiple tax exemptions and incentives are provided? When will the new hotels be mandated to provide housing for their employees and to finance the workers' pension instead of this being a burden for the taxpayers? Anyone?
I mean, it's been a contentious conversation about whether tourism benefits disproportionately from incentives and government support and other sectors. And what I would say, if you look at the impact that the fall off in tourism has had on the economy. Without a doubt, it has been significant, not just direct employment, but obviously the linkages to manufacturing and to agriculture. It's a different debate about the level of value add that is retained within the country. We know that we have high foreign ownership, so you know the profits are repatriated. You know, and you obviously get the employment and you get the other services, but you know, we still have very high foreign ownership, and you're going to have profit repatriation. And to the extent that, you know, we need to strengthen the linkages so that you can have more farmers, manufacturers benefiting, I think that's important. And also encourage, you know, more local ownership so that you can retain the profits within the country and have them reinvested.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Mr. Leckie, there's a question from Peter John Gordon. He says, Mr. Leckie, which business person would admit that he is not in a sector which should be chosen as a winner? He also has a comment, and I think it's related to this question. He says, the pandemic has affected other sectors than tourism. There is no evidence that manufacturing is less affected than tourism. International movement of goods were severely affected by the pandemic also. Would you like to comment?
You just reread that question to me from?
Okay, so the question is, which business person would admit that he is not in a sector which should be chosen as a winner? And his comment, the pandemic has affected other sectors than tourism. There is no evidence that manufacturing is less affected than tourism. International movement of goods were severely affected by the pandemic.
I am looking why I push for agriculture to be one of the winners to be chosen is the fact that it has two-pronged approach. One is the fact that we're looking at a big import bill, which is nearly $1 billion, and we can do substitute. We can have substitution where it comes to some of the items. And we're looking at food security for our little island here, because what we are doing is to do away with all that we have and continue to import. The fact is, the concentration also has to be with R&D. There has to be more research and development. I must give you just a small example. If some of us can remember that we used to only get sorrel only at Christmas time. A research was done, and what we're doing now, we're looking at it all year around. This is the type of initiative that we have to look at, and it is very specific to Jamaica, and also it is one of those things that we do not have anywhere else where we are concerned with Jamaica is concerned. So we have what is called a niche market, which we can fully develop, and we can actually move it. Like I said, put all the necessary investment in it and push. That's the reason why I'm looking at agriculture and small business as one of the drivers and one of the winners, actually. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leckie. Let me go on to see.
What I would say in response to the tourism versus manufacturing, yes, both have been impacted. I think if you were to look at just the GDP outturn, certainly if you take the hotel and restaurants component versus what is recorded for manufacture, they're worlds apart in terms of the decline that has been recorded. We can argue about that. The difference, I think, for the manufacturers is that in terms of pivoting for them, it was far easier to do more local because persons now are not necessarily able to, you know, partake in particular things. And also we know that the food sales in the context of you know, working from home, no face-to-face classes. So the demand side of that, yes, they may be constrained in terms of getting their inputs on the basis that they may have been used to. But I think there was a little bit more room for some manufacturers. Yes, they had to work through the social distancing on the plant floor and all of those other things. But even in terms of their sales, many of them took advantages of their fleet and, you know, brought goods to different communities for sale on sites, leveraging, you know, point of sale machines and others. I mean, yes, it's small, but to the extent that they could do that, the tourism sector was not necessarily able to do that. Eventually, you saw them, in particular the hotels, of course, you saw them, you know, trying to attract persons via staycations and other activities. When the controlled re-entry just started, they offered part of their plants to the government for use as a quarantine and isolation facilities. But still, in terms of that throughput and turnover of guests, they would not have been seeing that necessarily. And so there are differential impacts. I'm not arguing for one or the other. I'm just saying in some of the metrics that we are observing, the hotel and restaurant line item from GDP has been impacted by a larger dip.
But can I say something? The truth is, I'm not into the business of picking winners, but our micro, medium, and small business sector, it accounts for the largest share of employment in this country. So the government, in my mind, has an obligation to protect that sectors. Those are people, those are companies, those small micro companies, they are owned by Jamaicans. Okay, they have nowhere going. And so it is my view that the government should support that sector, because they are owned, those companies are owned by Jamaicans. Right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Okay, I think that I have, if I'm not mistaken, I've exhausted. I see you guys are interacting with each other, which is, you know, wonderful. I think that I have exhausted all questions. Oh, no. I see more coming in from my colleague, Dr. Brathwaite. So Sam said, on the issue of cooperation with CARICOM, we have to be careful to distinguish between the CARICOM Secretariat and CARICOM countries. Surely we cannot ignore what Mia Motley of Barbados has done, resharing of vaccines. This is not to cast aspirations on the GOJ, which has a large population to contend with, and as such, choose not to share vaccines. Any comment on this?
I guess since as the one who raised the CARICOM issue, I will. I mean, and I take the point, yes, you know, what individual CARICOM countries has done versus the Secretariat, which I think has more on the international arena from a regional perspective. That's what I was saying. I mean, the issue of vaccines came in as one possible area in which CARICOM as a regional entity or regional integration movement could play a role. I'm not limiting it to that, and I'm not certainly suggesting, of course, anything about what any individual country is doing or is not doing. Just wondering about the role for the larger body in the context of their perennial search for regional integration. And that would require regional public goods and the promotion of activities that generate positive externalities across the region. So it was a broad comment. The vaccine one just came in as through the chat as an area in which that could possibly benefit from such intervention.
Okay, thanks much, Dr. Clarke. Okay, so we have more questions in the and comments in the chat. Peter John Gordon said, you recall that there was a glut in foods at the beginning of the pandemic. The point is that many of the local producers of food were aimed at bulk market, hotels, schools, etc. The people would find it very difficult. They would find it very difficult to pivot to the domestic retail market because of packaging requirement. Hence they turn to farmers market. So I think that is responding to your comment, Dr. Clarke. And another comment and a question from Sophia. Good point, Dr. Williams. Read the composition of the micro and small business sector being Jamaican owned, but even more important is the fact that these are the firms that are most vulnerable and require scaffolding. Since you raised it, do you think these firms need more support than what is included in the budget? So that's for you, Dr. Williams.
Mr. Leckie points to improve more support. I think the government can or should provide a bit more support for these companies beyond what is included in the budget. For example, the government it could provide provide more financial support for these companies to retain some of their employees that lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. You know, the government, for example, I hope after, when we are on the other side of COVID, the government can help many of these companies who are supplying the local market to pivot towards exports, you know, so as to get those companies to supply Jamaicans, for example, in the diaspora, overseas, and so on. So there is room for improved government support towards this sector, because make no mistake, they have nowhere going. They will always be with us. When the, you know, some of the larger companies, for example, in the hotel sector, you know, when they can leave us, you know, these our small indigenous firms, they will always be with us. So you have to protect your own. At least you have to do that. And that is where I'm coming from, that the government should pivot towards protecting this sector.
Yes, and I must add and support what you're saying, because patriotism, don't discount it. Patriotism to the country. When you look, you will not have capital flight, you will not have foreign exchange flight, you won't have a number of things. You will have people here at all times making sure that bread and butter is on the table. And what I've always said, and I've expressed it elsewhere, that government needs to should be at around the same table with the small business sector to show strength, to show that we are together in the fight, we are together to make sure the push for more support, and that they are here for us as a sector. And what I've always said, which is key to anything, moral suasion is one of the things that cause people to move and cause people to have more confidence. I have seen within my sector where a number of medium-sized and big businesses have started from small businesses, and you will always get that. I see where in the budget it is asked for equity financing for small businesses and so on, and another 200,000 to allow us to pivot into the digital sphere. It's all well and good, but the immediate injection of the support, which will cause the economy to move, is a key factor. I agree with all the other things they will take over time because we have an institutional and we're infrastructure problem. But when you have a direct injection of capital with it, you will see a quick turnover and you will see the multiplier effect reverberating within the economy, and see we will move. That's all we're asking, and I can assure you that you can depend on our sector to assist in the movement of the growth of the Jamaican economy.
Thank you so much. On that note, guys, on Mr. Leckie's note, I think we have to end. I'm so sorry our time has expired. I'm having so much fun. I know that you guys are having fun and you've been well engaged throughout. So, you know, but again, we have to go. I just want to say thanks to our panelists, Mr. Julian Robinson, Mr. Michael Leckie, Dr. Christine Clarke, and Dr. Kevin Williams for sharing their views. And of course, thank you, our audience, for coming to this evening's event. We hope that you found the discourse fruitful and edifying. Thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch whenever we're having another forum such as this one. Thank you guys so much. This is good stuff. Thank you all.
Thank you very much too.
Oh yes, and thanks to Richard. How can I not say thanks to Richard in the background, Tony and Marie in the background helping us out. Thanks to all the essential workers in the background helping us out. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.